Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. My name is Ramesh Bijlani. It's my privilege to send to you all the love and blessings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother from Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. I have with me here today Aditi Kaul, who is a highly qualified psychologist. She has a PhD in psychology and she considers herself a perpetual student. She has not stopped learning. However, she has also started teaching psychology at Euro University in Surat. She has a few questions which I'll try to answer, although I'm sure she may be able to supplement the answers with something which is even more valuable than what I say. Aditi, please go ahead.
The first question which I want to know from you is that yoga is a word which is very common these days. Everybody uses the word. So, how do we widen our understanding of the word yoga and what is the applicability of that word in our day to day life?
That's a very good question because, in general, there is a resistance towards widening the meaning of yoga. Even if people know that yoga is a spiritual discipline, they still continue to equate it with the physical practices like asanas and pranayamas. And even if you try to suggest to them that it means much more than that and there is a spiritual philosophy underlying it, they don't seem very interested because they feel, well, I want to improve my health and to stay fit. Probably these practices are enough. So why should I bother with all that? And if there is a spiritual philosophy, well, I know it will involve some sort of ethical principles. I live my life well. And what have those ethical principles got to do with these physical practices? Because they are just like another exercise. They are different type of exercise and they are more efficient. And that's why I want to do them. But at the same time, why should I bother with the spiritual part of it? Which means that they really don't see a link between the physical practices and the spiritual basis of yoga. And also, they feel that it is not really necessary, it's not important, even if there is a link. Now, this link can be very easily understood. Because after all, what do these practices like asanas, pranayamas, even meditation? Meditation is also a technique. So, what do these techniques of yoga really do? They improve the performance of the body and the mind. Asanas and pranayamas, primarily that of the body, and the meditative techniques that of the mind, although there is really no hard and fast dividing line, the body and the mind both are so well connected. The mind-body relationship is now on a very sound scientific footing. But at the same time, for convenience, we can arbitrarily say that asanas and pranayamas primarily improve the performance of the body and meditation that of the mind. So all these techniques improve the performance of the body and the mind. That is something good, even necessary and desirable, but it is not sufficient. Because after all, what are the body and the mind? They are mere instruments. They are instruments for action in the world. And it is good to sharpen the instrument, but it's not enough. For example, suppose we sharpen a knife. Now with this knife, sharp knife, we can chop fruits and vegetables, but we can also stab somebody. In the same way, if through these techniques like asanas, pranayamas, and meditation, a person has improved the performance of his body and mind, he'll be able to do whatever he does better, because these are the basic instruments for all our actions. This person will therefore make a better teacher, a better doctor, a better engineer, a better scientist, a better manager. But then come to think of it, suppose a terrorist is physically unfit, is emotionally unstable, and intellectually dull. Will he be able to launch a successful terrorist attack? No, he won't be able to. Which means that if he also improves the performance of his body and mind through these yogic techniques, he improves his chances of becoming a more successful terrorist. Now, if a discipline helps a terrorist as much as it helps a teacher, it cannot be considered a spiritual discipline. And we all say that yoga is a spiritual discipline. What makes yoga a spiritual discipline is the fact that yoga not only has these techniques for improving the performance of the body and the mind, yoga also provides guidance on how to use these instruments. And if a person follows this guidance which comes from yoga, which is based on a spiritual philosophy, this guidance is based on a spiritual philosophy. So if a person follows this guidance, it will not let him become a terrorist. So that is the important thing. And that is what makes yoga a spiritual discipline. That's what makes it a much wider discipline than just these physical practices. And that is also what makes it a 24-hour discipline. As Sri Aurobindo has said, all life is yoga. Now, this can be easily misinterpreted. It does not mean all life, no matter how lived, is yoga. What it means is that all life provides us an opportunity for the practice of yoga. How does it provide this opportunity? By presenting us with choices. And when we have a choice to make, we need some guidance. And yoga provides us that guidance, the best guidance possible. And if we start living our life in terms of this guidance, then not only we find that these physical practices become more effective, because that in fact is the only way in which we can improve the performance of the body and the mind more effectively. If the techniques are done like any other exercise in isolation, they will give us something, we will benefit, but not as much, because health doesn't depend just upon exercise. In fact, the role of the mind can be overriding. The psychological factors can override physical factors when it comes to bodily health. And if a person says, well, I have understood that, I'll do these physical practices, and along with that, I'll stop worrying about anything. It's easier said than done. The person will not succeed. Why the person will not succeed is because he'll try to use his mind to keep the mind at peace. Now, how can you achieve peace? By using an instrument which by itself is never at peace. The mind by its very nature is turbulent, and the intellect does not help much, although it can, but generally it does not, because we primarily are dominated by emotions. And therefore, the emotions end up exploiting the intellect to find reasons for justifying what we feel like doing. So the emotional part of the being is turbulent. The mind is always vacillating, trying to sometimes tell us what is the right thing to do, what is ideal, and on the other hand, getting dominated by the emotional part of the being and giving us another set of arguments which lead us astray. So that is possible. So the result is that we cannot be at peace if we depend upon the mind to keep us at peace. However, the mind is also a manifestation of the divine, and therefore, while it is imperfect, it is turbulent, it is not incapable of moving towards perfection. And how will it move towards perfection? If it gets enlightened by the deepest part of our being, the soul. And that is where spirituality enters the picture. Now, the soul is not an inert entity just to give us the consolation that at least some bit of us will continue to live even after we are dead and gone. It also has a dynamic component, the psychic being, which Sri Aurobindo and the mother have called the psychic being. So it is the dynamic aspect of the soul that gives us infallible guidance at all crucial moments in life, and it gives us this guidance very quickly and clearly, leaves us with no doubt that that is the only right thing to do. And if we let this part of our being, the deepest part of our being, enlighten our mind, then only it can be at peace, because the soul is always at peace. So it's like anchoring a ship. If the ship is on turbulent waters, you have to anchor it to the shore. So the mind also needs to be anchored. It should be anchored to something which itself is stable. And that stable part is the soul, because the soul has no desires. The soul is never angry. The soul doesn't hate anybody. The soul loves all. So the soul is not afflicted by all these, 6 enemies, the Shadripu, Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Ahankar, Matsarya. It's not afflicted by these. Kama, desires; Krodha, anger; Lobha, greed; Moha, attachment; Ahankar, arrogance; Matsarya, jealousy. So these are the 6 basic enemies which afflict the mind and do not let it be at peace. The soul is not afflicted by them. The soul doesn't have any of these. So if we anchor the mind to the soul, which means that we let the mind work in light of this, the dynamic aspect of the soul, then only the mind can be at peace. So that is where spirituality enters. And then further, spirituality enters also not only for making choices, but the spirit in which we do our work, the spirit in which we work. It enters that. And that's again very important because we are doing some work all the time. So if we learn to work as instruments of the divine, that makes it very peaceful. There's a little story on how working as an instrument takes away all the stress associated with work. There was once a king who grew old and then thought that now it is time that I should quit and pay exclusive attention to higher and finer aspects of life. So, but at the same time, he was feeling very responsible towards his subjects, and he could not see a second line clearly. Who will take over from me and do as good a job as I have been doing? So he diverged the state of his mind to his guru. And his guru told him, oh, just that much is your problem? Suppose I take over your responsibilities, will it be okay? So he said, sir, what can be better than that? So then the guru said, okay, so now you are relieved from your post and I am the king from now onwards. But then how will you live? He said, well, I'll take a little money from the treasury. His guru said, but you can't do that because now I am the king. I'll not let you do that. So then he said, then I'll find a job. So the guru told him, suppose I give you a job, will you do that? He said, what can be better than that? So the guru told him, I have the post of the king lying vacant in my kingdom. So would you like to take up that job? Now, what this little story illustrates is that now if he assumes that same responsibility, he's not worried the way he was earlier. Now he's at peace because he's working for the guru. And therefore he's not afflicted, after me what? Well, the guru has no shortage of instruments. Right now I am his instrument. When I am dead and gone, or for that matter, when the guru feels that now this model is too worn out, he'll withdraw me and then replace me with another better, newer model. So then you're not worried. So the way we do our work, the spirit in which we do our work, the choices that we make in the course of our everyday life, and the way we respond to ups and downs of life, which are also inevitable. Because being on the spiritual path does not make a person immune to a road accident or to a financial loss or a failed marriage or an incurable illness. He still remains just as vulnerable to all these things as anybody else. What makes a difference is that now this person is not miserable because of these unpleasant events. Because now he knows that these are also opportunities for spiritual growth, and therefore he is able to maintain equanimity. Not only equanimity, in fact, equality. The difference is that equanimity can be just philosophical indifference. But equality means that he accepts these ups and downs with equal delight. And that's why Sri Aurobindo has, more or less always used this word equality while talking about the samatva of the Gita. Because it's acceptance with equal delight. Now, if a person is able to accept all ups and downs with equal delight, does his work without feeling the stress of the work, and is able to always make the best choices in life, then what else is left in life? Life basically consists of all these things, which means that he can bring the guidance provided by yoga into all these aspects of life, and that's how all life becomes yoga. So yoga is not a 1 hour commitment a day to keep physically fit. That is essential because the bodily frame and the body and the mind both, in fact, should be in a good shape for us to be able to do anything properly, including what we have to do as an instrument of the divine. So to be on the spiritual path, also we need a healthy body and mind. So that is, of course, essential. Those techniques are therefore important. They have a place. But then you may spend an hour or two on those techniques, but all the remaining time is available for using these instruments, the body and the mind, the performance of which has improved through these practices. And that's how yoga becomes a 24-hour discipline and a lifelong commitment. It may look like a big burden. We thought we'll just do yoga for 1 hour a day and look for, in fact, shop for those who can tell us how to do yoga in half an hour. And here is somebody who's saying that all life is yoga and it's a 24-hour commitment. But the important thing to keep in mind is that it's not a burden to be carried. It's not a burden to be carried because that makes our life healthier and happier. So we can enjoy the journey without worrying about the destination. We need not even worry about the destination of yoga. We can just enjoy the journey. The journey of life becomes enjoyable if we bring this guidance provided by yoga into life in addition to the techniques. So if one may sort of simplify it, one can say that yoga consists of these techniques which improve the performance of the body and the mind, and the guidance which helps us in living a better and more meaningful life. So yoga is we can more or less put it in the form of mathematical equation. Yoga is techniques plus guidance. And that is what gives us a wider view of life and also helps us understand why it is important to bring that element in and not be just content with the physical practices.
Yeah, I think it has given us a 360-degree view and a complete understanding. And the takeaway which one can make is the whole idea of instrument, and not just the functioning of the instrument, but also the composition of the instrument. And the guidance helps us to make a perfect composition so that the application is much wider in that context. So thank you so much for that widening understanding.
Thank you, Aditi, for raising that question.
Thank you.